sun was just beginning to rise behind the glass skyline of downtown Los Angeles, casting golden light over a city still stirring from sleep. People moved like ghosts between concrete and exhaust, their footsteps fast, their gazes mostly downward. In front of the Bristol Grand Hotel, a man in a charcoal vest and heavy bracelets stepped out into the brightness, his face half shielded by dark sunglasses. Johnny Depp wasn't there for fanfare, though the city always seemed to give him that anyway. He was there for a photo shoot, another obligation in a life filled with performance, layers and masks. But that morning would take off its disguise. Thomas, his quiet and loyal chauffeur, opened the rear door of the limousine with a respectful nod. "Morning, Mr. Depp," he said. Johnny gave him a small grin. "Morning, Thomas. Let's hit that studio, yeah. But let's swing past Maine on the way. I need coffee that doesn't taste like airport fuel." As he moved toward the limo, something soft and trembling grabbed onto his leg. Startled, Johnny looked down and saw a girl, no older than 9, her head completely bald, skin pale like candle wax, clutching him like a lifeline. She didn't speak. She just held on, eyes focused on something far behind her. There was fear in her silence, a kind that spoke of things not easily explained. Then a voice shattered the moment. "Hey, you little leech." A man with all-stained hands and a grocery apron came storming up the sidewalk. "Always sneaking around my store like a stray mutt," he shouted. "You scare off my customers, you hear me?" The girl let go without a word and vanished into the crowd like vapor. Johnny stared at the man, still confused. "She yours?" "Mine? Hell no. That freak has been haunting the corner of my shop for weeks. Doesn't steal, not yet, but she's always touching everything. Makes people uncomfortable. Creepy, you know." Johnny tilted his head. "So, she hasn't actually done anything wrong?" "Well, not technically, but you're convinced she will?" The store owner faltered. "Look, mister, wait a second. Are you? Oh God, you're Johnny Depp. Wow, I didn't mean any disrespect, sir." Johnny raised his hand to stop the apology. "You're good. But let me tell you something," he said calmly. "In my experience, the people we misunderstand the most are usually the ones with stories that would break us if we ever bothered to listen." He got into the limousine without another glance at the man. But inside, his thoughts stayed with her. The girl, her touch, her silence, the fear in her bones. "Thomas," he said, leaning forward. "Slow down. I want to look for someone." Thomas nodded, without needing to ask why. The limousine crept slowly along the side streets, the world outside filtered through tinted windows. Johnny leaned forward, eyes searching the sidewalks like a man looking for a memory he wasn't sure was real. Somewhere between a flower cart and a shuttered bookstore, he spotted her again. Huddled beneath a faded awning, the little girl sat cross-legged on the pavement, her knees pulled to her chest, a paper cup resting between her feet with exactly 3 nickels and 1 crumpled dollar inside. She wasn't crying. That was somehow worse. There's a kind of silence that doesn't need tears. It just hangs in the air, cold and unforgiving. "Pull over," Johnny said. "Now." Thomas brought the limousine to a halt without hesitation. Johnny stepped out, careful not to move too quickly, not to scare her. The city's sounds faded behind him as he knelt in front of the girl. "Hey," he said gently. "We meet again." She looked up slowly, her eyes hollow, but recognition sparked in them. She didn't speak, but her lips trembled. Johnny reached into his coat and pulled out a thin wad of bills, hundreds maybe. He dropped them into her cup like it meant nothing. The girl stared at it. Then she launched forward, not for the money, but for him. She hugged his leg again, this time not with desperation, but with something softer, like hope. "Thank you," she whispered. Johnny smiled. "You asked for help. I'd like to know what kind." The girl pulled away slightly. "Are you really Jack Sparrow?" "I've been known to borrow his swagger," he said in that familiar lilt, and she giggled, just for a moment. Then her face grew serious. "My name's Sonia," she said. "I'm 10. I live kind of live at an orphanage, but I run away sometimes. It's too loud, too many sick kids, and I'm one of them." Johnny's eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but in focus. Sonia lowered her voice. "I have cancer. They said I'm lucky. Stage 3, which doesn't sound lucky, but they said it could have been worse. The meds help, but the money stopped. Before he could respond, a small crowd began to form. People with camera phones. Some gasped, others called out, some pushed forward hoping for a selfie with a star. One woman stepped between him and the girl, completely unaware she was blocking a moment more sacred than celebrity. The girl shrank into herself, panic washing over her face. Johnny stood, shielding her with his coat. "Back up," he said, not with anger, but something sharper, finality. Thomas, sensing the shift, stepped forward and opened the limo door. Johnny turned to Sonia. "Come with me," he said, "just for a minute." She looked at him, her face a war of fear and need. "You promise you won't take me back yet?" "Promise, just talk." She nodded. Inside the limo, the air was cool, quiet, safe. She sat curled against the door, her legs tucked under her like she'd done this in many corners of many rooms before. Johnny sat opposite her. "You said you needed help," he said again. Sonia didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her threadbare hoodie and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is from the hospital," she said. "It says I need 3 more treatments, but the orphanage can't pay anymore. Miss Abigail cries at night when she thinks we're all asleep." Johnny unfolded the paper. It was real. The dates, the doses, the costs scribbled in red ink. He knew what cancer treatment looked like. He knew the hospital name. He knew the helplessness in a child's handwriting. He looked up. "What if I could help?" Sonia looked uncertain. "You mean money?" "No," he said. "I mean everything, medicine, a real doctor, maybe a little less noise." Her lip quivered. "But people always promise things, then they leave." Johnny's voice softened. "And sometimes one of them doesn't." The light turned green. The limo rolled forward, but this time it wasn't heading to the studio. "Thomas," Johnny said. "Turn around. Take us to that orphanage." "Understood," Thomas replied. Johnny turned back to Sonia. "You hungry?" She nodded. "We'll stop first, but only if you promise to eat something more than candy." She cracked a smile, the first real one he'd seen. "Even pirates need vegetables." "Even pirates," he said, settling back into the leather seat. The orphanage stood like a forgotten relic on a side street that even the GPS seemed hesitant to register. The paint was faded, the gate hung slightly crooked, and the sign, Hope S. Haven, had a letter missing, leaving it to read HP S. Haven. But the moment the limousine rolled to a stop in front of it, Sonia's body tensed beside Johnny. She didn't want to go in, that much was clear. Her shoulders curled in, her eyes locked on the gravel beneath the tires, and her hands clenched the Jack Sparrow coin he had given her earlier. "I don't want to go in yet," she whispered. "You don't have to," Johnny said. "We'll wait here, you and me." She leaned her head against the window, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke. The city moved outside in slow, dusty lines. A dog barked in the distance. The sun began to slide behind the apartment blocks, casting gold across cracked concrete. "I used to think," she said suddenly, her voice thin and weightless, "that the reason I lost my hair was because my body hated me. Like I was being punished for something. Miss Abigail says it's just the medicine, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like my body, trying to disappear me." Johnny didn't speak. He knew better than to fill that silence too quickly. Sometimes truth needs room to echo. "But then I saw you," she continued. "On the TV. You were being chased by pirates and tied to poles and thrown into oceans, and you still made jokes. I thought, if Captain Jack can smile when the whole world wants to hang him, maybe I can survive one more hospital night." Johnny turned toward her, eyes shadowed by his sunglasses. "You're braver than I ever was," he said. "I pretend to be a pirate. You fight real battles." Sonia looked at him, searching his face for dishonesty. When she found none, she nodded. A few minutes later, a woman stepped out from the orphanage. Her silver hair was caught in a loose bun, and her face, though aged, carried a softness that had clearly been shaped by years of heartbreak and trying anyway. It was Miss Abigail. She spotted the limousine, blinked at it, then at the small girl inside. She began to move faster. Johnny stepped out just as Miss Abigail reached the car, her expression a kaleidoscope of relief, confusion, and worry. "Sonia," she called out. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" "She's fine," Johnny said calmly. "She just needed some air, and maybe a friend." Miss Abigail's eyes finally focused on him, and recognition spread slowly across her face like dawn. She began, her voice faltering. "Yes," Johnny replied. "But today I'm mostly just someone who gives a damn." Sonia stepped out of the car. Her legs wobbled slightly, but she stood tall. "I told him," she said, her voice stronger now. "About the hospital, about the medicine." Miss Abigail's eyes misted instantly. She opened her arms, and Sonia stepped into them, hesitating for a second before melting into the embrace. "I'm sorry," Sonia said. "I didn't mean to make you worry." "You never have to apologize for being afraid," Miss Abigail whispered, her voice cracking. "Never." They stood like that for a long moment, as the sky bruised purple above them. Inside, the orphanage smelled of dust and old books and warm laundry. The common room was filled with handmade drawings, cracked tiles, and laughter that didn't know it was poor. A few children peered from doorways, whispering to each other. One little boy rubbed his eyes, then gasped, "Captain Jack." Johnny smiled and gave a theatrical bow, but his eyes were already on the stack of envelopes pinned on the notice board. Most were medical bills. "Can we talk?" he asked Miss Abigail. She led him to her office, a small room filled with boxes, file folders, and a world map with pins in places that no child from this building had ever seen. "I'm afraid," she began, "that Sonia told you everything." "She didn't tell me how close you are to losing this place," Johnny said gently, picking up one of the bills. "She didn't say how often you've skipped meals to pay for medicine." Miss Abigail's lips parted, but no denial came. Instead, she lowered herself into the chair behind the desk. "I used to be a nurse," she said after a moment. 20 years ago. I want to start a home for kids who had no one. But I never imagined cancer would come for one of them, or that it would be Sonia. She's a light. And now the light's flickering." "It's not going out," Johnny said. "Not if I can help it." She looked up at him. "I want to pay for her treatment," he continued. "All of it, and not just that. This place, it needs walls that don't leak, fridges that work, beds that don't creak like they're crying. I want to help fix that too." Miss Abigail said nothing at first, just blinked once, twice. Then she whispered, "Why?" Johnny shrugged. "Because someone should. And because I met a girl who reminded me that sometimes the real heroes are 5 feet tall, bald, and carry a coin like it's a sword." The next morning arrived wrapped in soft hospital light, and the smell of sterile plastic and gentle dawn. Johnny awoke in the same chair he'd fallen asleep in, stiff and groggy, but present. He rubbed his face, stood slowly, and looked towards Sonia's bed. She was already awake, her eyes glassy but alert. She wasn't crying. She wasn't smiling either. She was simply there, grounded in that small hospital bed with the pirate hat still tilted over her brow, and the gold coin now tucked inside her hospital bracelet like a talisman. When she saw him move, she gave the smallest nod, a silent signal. "I'm ready." Miss Abigail stood near the door, speaking softly with the nurses, going over forms and charts, while Johnny took Sonia's hand. "You know," he said, his voice thick with sleep but gentle, "I've been in a lot of dangerous situations. Escaping cursed treasure caves, facing down sea monsters, fighting entire fleets, but I've never been as nervous as I am right now." "Why?" Sonia asked, her voice rasping slightly. "Because I care more about this outcome than any other," he replied, leaning in. "I want you to come back from this with both fists up, ready for more." She gave a small grin, trying to be brave. "Like a pirate." He nodded, "Like a pirate with something to live for." The medical team entered, cheerful but focused. They began prepping her for the procedure, wheeling her bed slowly out of the room. As she passed the threshold, Sonia looked over her shoulder. "You promised," she whispered. "I did," Johnny said, "and I keep my promises." The doors closed behind her, leaving the room colder somehow. What followed were hours of anxious waiting, of pacing hallways, of coffee left untouched, and silence filled only by the distant murmur of overhead announcements. Miss Abigail tried to fill the air with hopeful stories of children who had gone on to live full, healthy lives, but Johnny couldn't focus. All he could think about was a small girl with too much pain for one lifetime, who still managed to smile like the sun hadn't given up yet. Finally, after what felt like a day trapped in a bottle, Doctor Marvy appeared at the end of the hallway. His scrubs were wrinkled, his expression unreadable. Johnny stood, heart caught in his throat. "She made it," Dr. Marvy said with a tired but proud smile. "Surgery went better than expected. We removed the tumor and the lymph nodes. She's resting now." Miss Abigail exhaled like her lungs had been underwater. Johnny sat down, his legs suddenly weak. "Can we see her?" he asked. "In a few minutes," the doctor said. "Let her settle first." Those few minutes passed like rain on a ship deck, slow, cold, and full of tension. When they were finally allowed in, Sonia lay pale against the sheets, but alive. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw Johnny and Abigail, she smiled, weak but real. "Captain Jack," she murmured. "Did we win?" "We did," he whispered. "You were magnificent." The days that followed were a blur of careful recoveries, daily checkups, and subtle moments of healing stitched between bigger ones. Johnny stayed at the hospital, mostly in the evenings, bringing stories, drawings, pirate songs softly hummed. Miss Abigail handled the logistics, arranging follow-up care and helping the nurses understand Sonia's particular needs. Then, one afternoon, Sonia sat up straighter in bed and looked Johnny in the eye. "Will I ever be normal?" Johnny paused. Then he leaned in, his voice low and steady. "No, sweetheart, you'll be better than normal. You'll be extraordinary, because you've already seen what most people never do, the edge of everything. And you didn't fall off." She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "I want to help other kids like me someday." "You will," he said. "And when you do, I'll be there, cheering the loudest." Before leaving the hospital, Johnny held a quiet meeting with Miss Abigail and his legal team. He decided not just to fund Sonia's treatment, but to buy a new building for Hope's Haven entirely. A better place, closer to clinics and parks, with enough room for expansion. He wanted a clinic inside it, one that bore Sonia's name. She had given him back something he hadn't realized he'd lost, the belief that doing the right thing, no matter how quietly, still mattered in a world filled with noise. When the press eventually caught wind of it, headlines screamed about Johnny Depp's secret angel work. But by then, he was already gone, back to his work, his roles, his travels. He asked for no interviews. He gave no statements. He simply called the orphanage every week, sent books, asked how Sonia was doing. Years passed. And then one day, long after the cameras had moved on, a young woman walked into a children's hospital oncology wing with a stethoscope around her neck, her hair grown back in soft curls, a golden coin hanging from a chain around her throat. Her name tag read, Sonia Rhodes, pediatric oncology nurse. She walked from room to room, humming softly, telling jokes, offering her hand to children who looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. And whenever they asked if she'd ever been scared too, she smiled, leaned in close and whispered, "Once, but a pirate helped me remember who I was." And across town, in a quiet house filled with books and sunlight, an old hat still sat on a shelf, dusty, weathered, and waiting for the next adventure.